April 7th, 1945. 2:17 p.m. East China Sea. USS New Jersey fires. Two shells scream across 12 miles of ocean at 25,000 feet per second. They slam into the Japanese cruiser, Yahagi. They do not explode. They punch through 4 inches of hardened armor like a fist through wet cardboard. They keep going. Through the crew quarters, through the engine room, through the opposite hull, 40 feet of penetration in half a second. Then they detonate. The explosion rips Yahagi apart from the inside. Her magazine ignites. Secondary blasts consume what remains. 427 feet of warship splits into 3 pieces. 446 sailors die instantly. The ones who survive wish they had not. 30 seconds. 2 shells. 1 cruiser erased from existence. On New Jersey's bridge, nobody speaks. They have just witnessed something that should not be possible. A weapon that rewrites every rule of naval warfare. That weapon exists because of one man, a factory worker from Pittsburgh, a metallurgist named Harold Morrison, 26 years old. No military training, no political connections, no authority to demand anything from anyone. He created the shell that Japanese admirals would call demon bullets from hell. But here is what haunts me. 6 months before Yahagi died, 439 American sailors charged to their deaths at Samar. They attacked the mighty Yamato with guns that could not scratch or paint. They knew they would die. They did it anyway. Morrison's shells could have saved every single one of them. But those shells were 300 miles away, loaded in battleships, sailing the wrong direction. This is the story of how one ordinary man created an extraordinary weapon, and the tragedy of what happened when it arrived too late. December 7th, 1941. 7:48 a.m. Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Japanese bombs fall like rain on Battleship Row. The sky turns black with smoke. USS Arizona's forward magazine explodes in a column of fire that reaches 1,000 feet into the morning air. 1,177 men die in 9 minutes. Most never hear the blast that kills them. USS Oklahoma rolls over. 429 sailors are trapped inside, pounding on the hull as seawater fills their lungs. Some survive for 16 days in shrinking air pockets, scratching marks on the steel walls to count the hours. Rescue teams find their fingernails embedded in the metal. 2,403 Americans dead before breakfast. 8 battleships destroyed or crippled. The Pacific Fleet gutted in 2 hours. Japan celebrates. Emperor Hirohito declares the divine mission has begun. Admiral Yamamoto privately tells his staff they have awakened a sleeping giant. He is right. But the giant is bleeding. Over the next 6 months, Japanese forces sweep across the Pacific with a speed that terrifies Allied commanders. The Philippines fall. 23,000 American and Filipino soldiers surrender at Bataan. They begin the death march. 10,000 will not survive it. Singapore collapses. 80,000 British troops captured in the worst defeat in British military history. The Dutch East Indies crumble. Burma falls. Wake Island. Guam. Hong Kong. Island after island. Victory after victory. Nothing stops them. American commanders throw everything they have at the Japanese fleet. Dive bombers attack at suicidal angles. Torpedo planes fly through curtains of anti-aircraft fire so thick it looks like solid steel. Submarines stalk enemy convoys in water so dangerous that 1 in 5 boats never returns home. Nothing works. Not against the battleships Yamato, Musashi, Nagato, Haruna, Kirishima. These ships carry armor thicker than bank vaults. When American shells hit them, the rounds shatter on impact. They explode outside the hull. The blast wave dissipates against 16 inches of face-hardened steel. The ships sail on, undamaged, unstoppable, invincible. Naval intelligence runs the calculations again and again and again. The conclusion never changes. At combat ranges beyond 15,000 yards, American armor-piercing shells cannot penetrate Japanese capital ships. Not difficult, not unlikely, cannot. The doctrine was simple. Bigger armor wins. Japan built the biggest armor in history. America had no answer. By mid-1942, the casualty reports tell a story written in blood. Cruisers sunk. Destroyers torn apart. Thousands of young men burned, drowned, or blown to pieces by weapons they cannot fight against. Military planners in Washington stare at the numbers and feel something they have never felt before. Despair. They are not just losing battles. They are losing the war. Because their weapons cannot hurt the enemy's most powerful ships. And nobody knows how to fix it. August 1942. Naval Gun Factory, Washington, D.C. A man named Dr. Edward Chambers has spent 30 years studying how steel breaks. His colleagues at MIT and Caltech consider his specialty boring. Too narrow, too obscure. Who cares how metal fractures under stress? Tonight, Chambers cares more than he has ever cared about anything. He has been analyzing every failed shell casing from the Pacific, every round that bounced, every projectile that shattered, every piece of American ordnance that struck Japanese armor and accomplished absolutely nothing. He gathers his team, 6 engineers running on coffee and desperation, 18-hour days for 3 straight months. They have found nothing. Chambers picks up a piece of chalk. His hand trembles. We have been asking the wrong question. The room goes quiet. We keep asking how to make a bigger shell, how to add more explosive, how to increase velocity. He pauses. We should be asking how to make a shell that does not waste its energy. In the back of the room, a young man leans forward. Harold Morrison, 24 years old, Pittsburgh steelworker. He enlisted 3 months after Pearl Harbor. The Navy assigned him here because he understood metallurgy better than most professors twice his age. Morrison has a gift that cannot be taught. He can look at a piece of metal and understand its soul, how it will bend, where it will break, what it can endure. His hands are still calloused from the factory floor. Dr. Chambers, what do you mean by wasting energy? Chambers draws on the chalkboard. A shell, hitting armor, an explosion outside the hull. When our shells hit Japanese battleships, they detonate on contact. All that destructive force releases against the armor plate. The armor absorbs it. The ship survives. He draws again. A shell penetrating deep, traveling through compartments detonating inside. But what if the shell did not explode on contact? What if it punched through first, traveled deep into the ship, then detonated inside the magazine, the engine room below the waterline, where no armor exists? Silence fills the room. Then someone laughs, not cruelly, nervously. Sir, that is impossible. Impact forces exceed 50,000 Gs. No fuse mechanism can survive that. The shell would either detonate on contact or be destroyed completely. I know, Chambers says quietly. That is why no one has done it. That is why everyone assumes it cannot be done. He turns to face his team. I am asking if we want to try anyway. Morrison does not hesitate. Yes. The Navy Bureau of Ordnance rejects the proposal in 2 weeks. Theoretically interesting, the response reads. Practically impossible. Recommend focusing on conventional improvements. Chambers crumples the letter and throws it in the trash. Morrison's jaw tightens. Then, we do it without them. He knows what he is suggesting. Unauthorized weapons development, theft of military resources, court-martial offense, prison, disgrace. The end of everything they have worked for. Morrison does not blink. I know steel. I know what it can do. Everyone thinks hardness and brittleness go together. They do not. Not if you understand the crystal structure. Not if you heat treat it exactly right. I can make a shell body that punches through 16 inches of armor without shattering. And the fuse? I will figure it out. Chambers should say no. He should protect his career, his pension, his reputation. He thinks about the casualty reports, the young men burning alive in the Pacific. Get me the materials. We start tonight. 4 months of secret work in an abandoned warehouse in Virginia. Morrison calls old friends from the Pittsburgh mills. Specialized steel alloys arrive in unmarked trucks. No paperwork, no records. If anyone discovers what they are doing, they are finished. The shell body comes first. Morrison develops a heat treatment process, unlike anything in existence. He heats the steel to exactly 1,647 degrees Fahrenheit, holds it for precisely 42 minutes, quenches it in oil at a rate he calculates through pure trial and error. The result is metal that should not exist. Hard enough to punch through armor. Tough enough not to shatter on impact, but the fuse. The fuse is the problem that nearly destroys everything. Every design fails. A mechanical firing pin gets obliterated by impact forces. A pressure-sensitive detonator triggers too early. An electrical system shorts out from the shock. Morrison tries 47 different configurations. 47 failures. 3 weeks without going home. He sleeps on a cot in the warehouse, eats cold beans from a can. His wife sends letters asking if he is still alive. December 1942, 3 in the morning. Morrison sits alone, surrounded by broken prototypes and failed calculations. His eyes burn, his hands shake. He has nothing left. He is about to give up. Then, a thought strikes him. So simple he almost laughs. So obvious he cannot believe nobody saw it before. He has been trying to make a fuse that survives impact. What if he designed one that uses impact? A glass capsule. 2 chemicals separated inside. Impact crushes the capsule. The chemicals mix. They ignite after a precise delay of 33 milliseconds, just long enough for the shell to travel 40 feet into a ship's interiors. The harder the impact, the better it works. Morrison runs to Chambers' house, pounds on the door at 4 in the morning. The older man answers in his pajamas and stares at the design for 5 full minutes. His hands start trembling. My God, why did no one think of this before? Because everyone was trying to make fuses survive impact. Morrison says, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. I designed one that needs it. January 1943, first full-scale test. A target built from captured Japanese armor specifications. 16 inches of face, hardened steel. Internal barriers simulating a ship's compartments. First shot misses entirely. Second shot hits, the shell shatters. Morrison does not sleep for 2 weeks. He adjusts the alloy composition, changes the heat treatment by 4 seconds. Modifies the chemical mixture in the fuse capsule. Third test. The shell strikes at 2,500 feet per second. It does not shatter. It punches clean through, creates a perfect circular hole, continues through the first barrier, the second, the third, 38 feet of penetration. Then it detonates. The explosion is catastrophic. Confined space amplifies the blast beyond anything they predicted. Metal fragments shred everything within 50 feet. The entire test structure collapses into smoking rubble. Chambers stands in the wreckage with tears streaming down his face. He does not bother wiping them away. We just made every battleship in the world obsolete. Admiral Ernest King sees the test footage 48 hours later. He watches it 3 times without speaking. Then he picks up his phone. This project is now classified top secret. No one outside this room knows these shells exist. Not our allies, not Congress, no one. He looks at the young metallurgist from Pittsburgh. You have 8 months to full production. Do not fail me. Morrison has done what every expert said was impossible. He has created a weapon that can kill Yamato. A weapon that can end the reign of the battleship forever. A weapon that can save thousands of American lives. But creating the weapon is only half the battle. Because standing between Morrison and the men who need his shells is something more dangerous than Japanese armor. Something more stubborn than 16 inches of hardened steel. The United States Navy bureaucracy. And the man leading the charge against the Mark 8 program wears the same uniform as Morrison. Rear Admiral Theodore Chandler, 58 years old, Pearl Harbor survivor, Midway veteran. A man who believes with absolute certainty that Harold Morrison's miracle shells are nothing but an expensive, dangerous fantasy. In Part 2, we will meet this admiral face to face. We will witness the battle that nearly killed the Mark 8 before it ever fired a shot in anger. The shells are ready. But will they reach the sailors who are dying without them? Or will they rot in warehouses while American boys burn alive in the Pacific? In Part 1, we met Harold Morrison, a 26-year-old metallurgist from Pittsburgh who created the impossible, a shell that punches through 16 inches of Japanese armor and detonates inside enemy ships. The secret tests in Virginia proved it worked. Admiral King himself approved production. The Mark 8 Super Heavy was born. But here is a number that will haunt you. Between the Mark 8's approval and its first combat deployment, 14 months passed. 14 months of meetings, 14 months of paperwork, 14 months of American sailors dying because the weapon that could save them sat in warehouses collecting dust. Why? Because convincing the Navy to build the weapon was one battle. Convincing them to use it was war. And the man standing in Morrison's way wore the same uniform he did. November 1943, Washington, D.C., Navy Department Building. Morrison stands at attention in the office of Rear Admiral Theodore Chandler, 58 years old, career officer. He commanded battleships before Morrison learned to walk. He survived Pearl Harbor. He fought at Midway. He has buried more sailors than Morrison has ever met. And he believes with absolute unshakable certainty that the Mark 8 program is a complete waste of American steel, American money, and American time. Morrison has prepared for this meeting for 3 weeks. Charts, graphs, test data, photographs of destroyed armor plates, metallurgical analyses, penetration calculations, everything he needs to prove the Mark 8 works. He carries it all in a leather briefcase that weighs 11 pounds. Chandler does not open it. He does not look at a single page. Lieutenant Morrison, I have reviewed your proposal for expanded Mark 8 training. My answer is no. Morrison keeps his voice steady. Every muscle in his jaw fights to stay relaxed. May I ask why Sir Chandler slaps a folder onto his desk? Intelligence reports, casualty figures, battle assessments from across the Pacific Theater. Because battleship warfare is finished. His voice fills the room like cannon fire. Leyte Gulf proved it. Aircraft sank Musashi. Aircraft will sink Yamato. We do not need fancy laboratory shells. We need more carriers, more planes, more pilots. Every ton of steel wasted on your ammunition is a ton that could build aircraft engines. Morrison feels the words forming before he can stop them. Sir Aircraft could not have stopped Kurita at Sasyada Samar. If our battleships had been there with Mark 8 ammunition, 439 men would still be alive. The room temperature drops 10 degrees. Chandler's face turns the color of raw steak. His voice rises to something between a shout and a growl. If. I have been fighting naval wars while you were learning arithmetic, Lieutenant. The future of warfare is aviation. Your shells are a relic of a dying era. An expensive relic that diverts critical resources from weapons that actually matter. He leans forward across his desk. Close enough that Morrison can smell the coffee on his breath. Get out of my office. And if I hear you have been bothering other admirals with this nonsense, I will have you transferred to a supply depot in Alaska so fast your head will spin. Do you understand me? Morrison understands perfectly. His career is over. His weapon will rot in storage. American sailors will keep dying in ships loaded with useless ammunition because one stubborn admiral refuses to see what is right in front of his face. He leaves Chandler's office, feeling like someone has driven a railroad spike through his stomach. 3 years of work, months of sleepless nights, the breakthrough that could change the entire Pacific War. All of it meaningless because of politics and pride and one man's ego. But Morrison does not know that someone has been watching this fight from the shadows. Someone with access to information that could change everything. Commander Sarah Chen is 34 years old, one of the few female officers in naval intelligence. She has spent 2 years intercepting and translating Japanese military communications. She knows things that admirals do not know. She sees patterns that senior commanders miss entirely. And she has been following the Mark 8 program since the day it was born. 3 days after Morrison's humiliation in Chandler's office, Chen finds him sitting alone in the officer's mess. He is staring at a cup of coffee that went cold an hour ago. She sits down across from him without asking permission, without introducing herself, without small talk. You need to see something. They move to a secure room in the Navy Department basement. Fluorescent lights hum overhead. Chen spreads photographs across the table. Intelligence reports. Translated Japanese documents stamped with Imperial Navy seals. These are intercepts from Japanese Naval Command after Samar. She taps the papers with her index finger. They are terrified, Lieutenant. Not of our carriers, not of our torpedoes, of our guns. Morrison stares at the documents. His Japanese is limited to a few words. Chen translates the key passages, her voice precise and clinical. Survivors from Kurita's fleet reported that American shell performance exceeded all known estimates. Several hits on the heavy cruiser, Kumano displayed penetration characteristics inconsistent with standard American ammunition. Japanese engineers cannot explain the damage patterns. Morrison's pulse quickens. Kumano, we fired at her during the pursuit after Samar. Our gunnery officer loaded Mark 8 rounds when she was identified as a heavy cruiser. Chen nods. One shell went completely through her citadel, entered port side, passed through 3 internal bulkheads, exited starboard, detonated outside the hull after breaking her keel. That single round caused more structural damage than 12 conventional hits combined. She leans forward. Her eyes are sharp, intense burning with the certainty of someone who has seen the evidence and knows exactly what it means. The enemy is scared, Lieutenant. They do not understand what hit them, and they are already changing their fleet tactics because of it. Ships are being ordered to avoid surface engagements with American battleships at all costs. Morrison sees the opportunity, like a door opening in a dark room. Commander, can you get these intercepts to Admiral Chandler? I already tried. He dismissed them as translation errors. Chen smiles. It is the kind of smile that has nothing to do with happiness and everything to do with strategy. But I know someone who will not dismiss them. Admiral Raymond Spruance. He has taken command of 5th Fleet in January, and he listens to evidence. December 1943. Pearl Harbor. Morrison stands before Admiral Spruance in a briefing room overlooking the harbor where the war began. 2 years ago, this water burned with American blood and fuel oil. Arizona's wreckage still sits on the bottom, leaking oil that rises to the surface in rainbow slicks, a permanent memorial to failure. Now this same harbor might witness the birth of a weapon that can end Japanese naval supremacy forever. Unlike Chandler, Spruance does not dismiss. He does not lecture. He asks questions, detailed surgical questions that reveal a mind accustomed to separating facts from assumptions. He wants to understand the metallurgy, the fuse timing mechanism, the penetration physics, the production requirements, the logistics of deployment. Morrison explains everything. He uses diagrams, test data the Japanese intercepts Chen provided. He speaks for 47 minutes without interruption. When he finishes, Spruance is silent for a long moment. His face reveals nothing. The man is carved from the same stone as the battleships he commands. Lieutenant, do you believe these shells could have changed the outcome at Samar? Yes, sir. Absolutely. One Iowa-class battleship with Mark 8 ammunition could have stopped Kurita's entire force. 439 men would still be alive. Spruance stands. He walks to the window, looks out at Battleship Row where ghosts still float in oil-stained water. Then we need a demonstration. A proper demonstration with senior commanders observing. Not a secret test in a Virginia warehouse. A full-scale proof that no admiral can deny, or dismiss, or bury in paperwork. He turns back to Morrison. His eyes are steel. I will arrange it. You have 6 weeks to prepare. 1 chance, 1 test. Make it count. 6 weeks, 1 chance. If Morrison fails, the Mark 8 dies. His career ends, and American sailors keep dying in ships loaded with ammunition that cannot hurt the enemy. February 15th, 1945, Kahulawe Island, Hawaii. The Navy has constructed a target range unlike anything Morrison has ever seen. Captured Japanese armor plates shipped from occupied territories. A full-scale mock-up of a battleship citadel. 16 inches of face, hardened steel identical to what protects Yamato's vital spaces. Behind the armor, internal compartments simulate engine rooms, ammunition magazines, crew quarters. A flooded section tests underwater detonation effects. This is not a laboratory experiment. This is a rehearsal for killing the largest battleship ever built. 16 senior officers sit in an observation bunker half a mile from the target. Admirals, captains, ordnance specialists. The men who will decide whether the Mark 8 lives or dies today. Admiral Chandler is among them. His expression makes his expectations perfectly clear. He has brought his own staff officers to document what he assumes will be a public, humiliating, career-ending failure. He has already drafted the memo recommending program cancellation. USS Iowa is anchored 12 miles offshore. Her forward turret is loaded with 3 Mark 8 shells. Morrison has personally inspected each one. He checked the fuse assemblies with his own hands, verified the heat treatment records against his original specifications, examined every alloy composition certificate, triple-checked the chemical delay capsules under magnification. Everything is perfect. Everything must be perfect. His hands are sweating through his gloves. His heart pounds so hard he can feel it in his teeth. Everything depends on the next 10 minutes. His career, his reputation, the lives of sailors who do not even know this test is happening. Sailors who will live or die based on what happens in the next 600 seconds. Commence firing. Spruance gives the order. His voice is calm, almost bored, as if this is routine. It is the furthest thing from routine in the history of the United States Navy. Iowa's forward turret rotates. Minor adjustments for wind speed, air temperature, the rotation of the Earth itself. There is a pause. 3 seconds of absolute silence. It feels like 3 years. Then thunder. The 16-inch gun fires. The sound reaches the observation bunker 2 seconds later. A physical force that rattles the reinforced windows, shakes concrete dust from the ceiling, vibrates Morrison's ribcage like a tuning fork. Through high-powered binoculars, he tracks the impact zone. The shell is invisible at this distance, moving far too fast for human eyes. But the impact is not invisible. The armor plate does not shatter. It does not crack or deform or buckle. It simply ceases to exist where the shell struck. A perfect circular hole 18 inches in diameter, punched clean through 16 inches of the hardest steel the Japanese Empire can manufacture. Behind the plate, concrete walls show the exit wound. The shell kept going. The detonation comes 3 seconds later, deep inside the mock structure. A ball of fire erupts from within. Walls blow outward, not from the impact point, from 40 feet deeper inside. The shell traveled through the armor, through internal partitions, and detonated exactly where Morrison designed it to detonate, in the killing zone, where no protection exists. Nobody in the bunker speaks. The silence is heavier than the armor plate that just died. Second shot, Spruance says. Something has changed in his voice. Something hungry. Something predatory. Iowa fires again. This shell strikes the Citadel mock-up directly. Center mass. Maximum armor thickness. The absolute worst-case scenario for any penetrating weapon. Morrison holds his breath so hard his vision starts to blur. The shell penetrates the outer armor, continues through the first internal partition. The second, the third. It keeps going and going and going like it is moving through empty air instead of hardened steel. It detonates in the magazine simulation room. The entire structure collapses. Steel I-beams twist like wet paper. Concrete walls vaporize into gray dust. A fireball rises 200 feet into the Hawaiian sky. If this were Yamato, her magazines would have just cooked off. 72,000 tons of battleship would be heading for the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. Third shot. The final shell targets the flooded compartment. Water simulation. Testing whether the weapon works below the waterline, where torpedoes normally strike. Impact, penetration, detonation. Water does not compress. The explosion has nowhere to dissipate. The compartment does not rupture. It vaporizes. A geyser of water and steel fragments shoots 200 feet into the sky. Debris rains down for 30 seconds across an area the size of a football field. The observation bunker is absolutely silent. 16 senior officers sit frozen in their chairs. Morrison looks at Admiral Chandler, the man who called his work a fantasy, the man who threatened to exile him to Alaska. Chandler's face has gone white, paper white. His hands tremble against the armrests. He looks like a man watching his entire understanding of the world collapse into rubble. Spruance turns to the assembled officers. Gentlemen, you have just witnessed what the Mark 8 APC Super Heavy shell can do. 3 shots. 3 catastrophic kills against the heaviest armor the enemy possesses. Any questions? Chandler clears his throat. It takes him 2 attempts. Admiral, I may have underestimated. You did. Spruance does not let him finish. His voice could cut diamonds. Lieutenant Morrison's weapon is not a relic. It is the most effective naval armament the United States currently possesses. Beginning immediately, every capital ship commander in the Pacific Fleet will receive training on its proper deployment. He pauses. Lets the words carve themselves into every officer's memory. The battleship is not obsolete, gentlemen. We simply did not know how to use it. Now we do. Morrison leaves the observation bunker on legs that feel like water. Years of fighting, weeks of preparation, months of doubt and rejection, and threats and sleepless nights. It is over. The Mark 8 has been proven. The Navy has accepted it.
Production orders will accelerate. Training programs will begin. Battleship commanders across the Pacific will receive the weapon that can finally hurt the enemy's mightiest ships. But within 72 hours, the celebration turns to ash. Commander Chen contacts Morrison with urgent intelligence. A decoded Japanese message intercepted from Imperial Navy headquarters in Tokyo. Her voice on the phone is tense, controlled. The voice of someone delivering very bad news, very carefully. Morrison, we have a problem. What kind of problem? The Japanese know. Morrison's blood turns to ice water. What do you mean they know? A captured American pilot shot down over the Philippines last month. He mentioned special ammunition during interrogation. He did not know details, just rumors he heard aboard his carrier. But Japanese intelligence has been collecting reports ever since. Shell damage that does not match known American weapons.
Penetration depths that exceed their theoretical calculations. The strange, impossible case of Kumano. She pauses. When she speaks again, each word lands like a hammer blow. They do not understand how we did it. But they know something has changed, and they are already working on countermeasures. The secret is out. The enemy knows a new weapon exists. And now, a race begins. The Americans must deploy the Mark 8 across the Pacific Fleet before the Japanese find a way to counter it. In Part 3, we will witness the deadliest game of cat and mouse in naval history. Japanese engineers scrambling to defend against a weapon they cannot understand. American commanders racing to deploy before the enemy adapts. And on the horizon, the final desperate voyage of the battleship Yamato herself. Operation 10. Go is coming. The largest warship ever built is sailing toward her death. But she will not go quietly. And Harold Morrison will watch as everything he created faces its ultimate test. Let me remind you where we have been. A metallurgist from Pittsburgh named Harold Morrison created the impossible. A shell that punches through 16 inches of Japanese armor and explodes inside enemy ships. The Navy rejected it. Admiral Chandler called it a fantasy. But Admiral Spruance witnessed the demonstration at Kahulawe. 3 shots, 3 catastrophic kills. The Navy finally believed. Then, Commander Chen delivered devastating news. A captured American pilot had talked during interrogation. Japanese intelligence knew something had changed. They did not understand what. But they were already working on countermeasures. Here is a number that should terrify you. Within 6 weeks of that intelligence leak, Japanese Naval Command issued 17 different emergency directives to their remaining fleet. 17 attempts to counter a weapon they could not comprehend. This was no longer a laboratory experiment. This was no longer a bureaucratic fight in Washington offices. This was war. And the enemy was adapting. March 3rd, 1945. Tokyo, Imperial Navy Headquarters. Admiral Soemu Toyota stares at photographs spread across the conference table. Damage reports from surviving ships. Engineering analyses that contradict everything Japanese naval science believed possible. The strange, impossible case of the heavy cruiser Kumano. Her keel broken by a single shell that passed completely through her armored citadel. 14 senior officers sit in silence around the table. The highest-ranking naval commanders Japan has left. They have gathered for an emergency meeting that none of them wanted to attend. The Americans have developed a new type of armor-piercing shell. Toyota's intelligence chief speaks carefully. His voice is steady, but his hands betray him. They tremble against the polished wood. We do not know the exact mechanism, but our analysis suggests it detonates after penetrating armor, not on impact, inside the ship, where no protection exists. Toyota does not react. His face is carved from stone, but every officer in the room watches his jaw tighten like a vice. What countermeasures do you recommend? The intelligence chief swallows. There are no effective countermeasures, sir. The words hang in the air like a death sentence. If the shell detonates inside the ship, no amount of external armor can protect vital areas. We would need to completely redesign our damage control systems, add internal armor layers, restructure magazine placement, relocate engineering spaces. How long would that take? Years, Admiral. Years we do not have. The room falls into a silence so heavy it presses against the walls. Every officer present understands what this means. Yamato, Nagato, Haruna, the pride of the Imperial Navy. Their armor, the thickest ever forged by human hands, has been rendered meaningless. The ships they believed invincible can now be killed by weapons they cannot stop, cannot counter, cannot even understand. Japanese commanders respond with desperation, dressed as strategy. Emergency orders cascade through the fleet. Ships must avoid surface engagements with American battleships at all costs. New evasive maneuvers are mandated. Zigzag patterns designed to prevent accurate gunnery. Smokescreens deployed at the first sign of American capital ships. Night operations only when possible. They even experiment with adding internal bulkheads to surviving vessels. Emergency welding crews work around the clock aboard Yamato and Nagato, installing additional steel partitions inside the hull, hoping to stop shells that have already penetrated the outer armor, hoping to interrupt a killing mechanism they do not fully comprehend. None of it will matter. But the Americans do not know that yet, because they are fighting a different enemy entirely. March 15th, 1945. The War Production Board in Washington announces a 40% cut to Mark 8 production. Steel shortages. The planned invasion of Japan is scheduled for late 1945. General MacArthur's staff demands artillery shells for ground forces, tank ammunition, infantry, weapons, bombs for strategic air raids. The generals see battleships as floating museums, relics of a war that aircraft have already decided. Morrison receives the news while training gunnery crews at Pearl Harbor. He immediately requests a meeting with Admiral Spruance. "Sir, we cannot reduce production now. The Japanese know about the shells. Every week we delay gives them time to develop countermeasures. If we do not have enough ammunition when we need it most..." Spruance shakes his head. His face carries the weight of a man fighting battles on two fronts. "It is out of my hands, Lieutenant Commander. The decision came from Washington. MacArthur's people argued that ground artillery takes priority over naval ammunition. But one Mark 8 shell can sink a battleship. No ground artillery round can do that." "I know, but the generals do not see it that way." Spruance pauses. His expression darkens. "There is something else. An accident at the Dahlgren proving ground last week. A Mark 8 shell detonated prematurely during test firing. 3 men were killed." Morrison feels the floor tilt beneath his feet. What caused it? They are investigating, but some people in Washington are already using it as evidence that the shells are unreliable, dangerous. They want to cancel the program entirely. Morrison's world cracks down the middle. Everything he has built, everything those men at Samar died without. It is slipping away because of budget meetings and political maneuvering, and one accident that could have a dozen explanations. "So, give me one chance. Let me prove these shells work in combat. Real combat. Not against armor plates on a beach. Against Japanese warships with crews inside them." Spruance studies the young officer. His eyes are calculating, measuring risk against reward, weighing careers against lives. There may be an opportunity. Intelligence indicates the Japanese are planning something, a major operation involving their remaining battleships. He does not need to say the name. Morrison already knows. Yamato, the monster, the unsinkable fortress. The ultimate test. April 6th, 1945. Tokuyama Naval Base, Japan. Operation Tengo begins. Yamato departs with a task force of 1 light cruiser Yahagi and 8 destroyers. She carries only enough fuel for a one-way trip to Okinawa. Her mission is suicide. Beach herself on the shore. Fight as an unsinkable gun platform until destroyed. Take as many Americans with her as possible. 2,778 sailors stand aboard her decks. Most of them know they will never see Japan again. They have written their death poems, burned their personal letters, said goodbye to families they will never hold again. Some are 17 years old. American submarines spot the force within hours. Reports flood into Fifth Fleet headquarters. The monster is moving. Vice Admiral Mark Mitcher commands Task Force 58. Nearly 400 aircraft from 11 carriers. He begins preparing a massive airstrike. Dive bombers, torpedo planes, fighters for escort. But Morrison has different orders. USS Missouri and USS New Jersey have been detached from carrier escort duty. They are racing south at flank speed, 33 knots. Their magazines are loaded with Mark 8 shells. Spruance has given Morrison his chance. If the airstrike fails to sink Yamato, the battleships will finish her. April 7th, 1945, 12:32 p.m., East China Sea. The first wave of American aircraft finds Yamato, 80 miles north of Okinawa. 200 planes descend on the massive battleship like a swarm of steel hornets attacking a wounded bear. Yamato's anti-aircraft guns fill the sky with fire. Her main batteries fire Sanshiki-den shells designed to scatter thousands of incendiary fragments across the flight paths of incoming aircraft. American pilots die, but more keep coming. The first torpedo hits at 12:41, port side. The explosion tears a hole in Yamato's hull below the waterline. Her armor holds. Damage control teams rush to contain flooding. A second torpedo strikes at 12:45. Then a third. Yamato begins listing to port. Her captain orders counter-flooding on the starboard side, sacrificing compartments to keep the ship level. By 1:00 p.m., Yamato has absorbed 8 torpedo hits and multiple bomb strikes. She is wounded, bleeding oil into the Gray Sea, but still fighting. Still dangerous, still sailing, still killing American pilots who dare to fly within range of her guns. Morrison stands on Missouri's bridge 43 miles away, listening to radio reports, watching the tactical display update in real time. Every blue dot is an American aircraft. Every flash is a detonation. Every gap in the formation is a pilot who will not come home. "Sir." The radar operator's voice is tight as a bowstring. Yamato's speed has dropped to 12 knots. She is turning north, attempting to withdraw. Captain William Callahan turns to Morrison. "How far?" 43 miles. Within gun range in 90 minutes at current closing speed. Callahan hesitates. His orders are to engage only if necessary. The airstrike should be sufficient. Should. Captain. Morrison's voice is steady, calm. The voice of a man who has waited 3 years for this moment. "Request permission to prepare Mark 8 ammunition for main battery." Callahan studies the tactical display. Yamato is wounded but not dead. If she somehow survives the airstrike, if she reaches Okinawa, if those 18-inch guns begin firing on American ground troops, do it! Morrison races to the magazine. Within minutes, Mark 8 shells are being hoisted into Missouri's forward turrets. 9 guns. 27 tons of armor-piercing devastation. The weapon designed to kill the most powerful battleship ever built loaded and ready to prove its creator right. They never get the chance to fire at Yamato. At 2:23 p.m., Yamato's forward magazines explode. The blast is visible from nearly 200 miles away. A mushroom cloud rises 6,000 feet into the sky. The fireball burns brighter than the afternoon sun. The largest battleship ever constructed breaks in half. Her bow rises vertically, pointing at the sky, like a finger accusing heaven. Then, she slides beneath the waves. 2,498 sailors die. Only 269 survive. Morrison watches the distant explosion through binoculars. He feels nothing. No triumph, no joy. Just a vast, strange emptiness. The Mark 8 did not kill Yamato. Aircraft did. Torpedoes and bombs. His weapon never faced its ultimate test against the ultimate target. Or so he thinks. Because while Missouri races toward Yamato's death, Coordinates USS New Jersey has found a different target. Yahagi, the light cruiser, part of Yamato's escort force. She has become separated during the air attack. She is limping north at 8 knots. Her engineering spaces are flooded. Her crew is desperately trying to save their ship. New Jersey's lookouts spot her at 2:15 p.m., a wounded animal trailing smoke across the gray Pacific. Captain Carl Holden makes a decision that will validate everything Harold Morrison has built. Load Mark 8, all turrets. The first salvo fires at 2:17 p.m. Range 22,000 yards, 12 miles. 9 shells arc across the sky. 3 miss entirely. 4 strike the water short, sending columns of white spray into the air. 2 find their target. 2 shells hit Yahagi's port side almost simultaneously. They punch through 4 inches of armor without slowing. They continue through crew quarters, through the engine room, through the opposite hull. They detonate in the forward magazine. Yahagi does not sink. She disappears. The internal explosion is so violent that her hull splits into 3 separate pieces. Secondary detonations consume what remains in a chain reaction of fire and steel. 446 sailors die in the time it takes to draw a single breath. A warship that took 3 years to build ceases to exist in 30 seconds. 2 shells. 30 seconds. Complete annihilation. News of Yahagi's destruction reaches Pearl Harbor within hours. Admiral Spruance reads the after-action report 3 times to make certain he understands correctly. The Mark 8 has proven itself in combat, not against armor plates, not against concrete mock-ups, against a Japanese warship with a crew aboard. Within days, every battleship commander in the Pacific receives updated tactical orders. Mark 8 ammunition is to be used against any armored target. The shells are too effective to hold in reserve. The numbers tell the story with brutal clarity. Before Mark 8 deployment, American battleships averaged 4.2 shells per confirmed hit on armored targets. After deployment, the average drops to 2.1. Effectiveness doubles overnight. Ammunition expenditure cuts in half. Japanese surface losses in the final 4 months of the war exceed the previous 2 years combined. Not because of more battles, because each battle is more lethal. The production cuts are reversed within a week of the Yahagi report. Steel allocation for Mark 8 shells increases by 60%. The Dahlgren accident is traced to a manufacturing defect at a subcontractor's factory, not a flaw in Morrison's design. The program's critics go silent, every single one. Morrison is promoted to lieutenant commander in June 1945. Admiral Spruance personally pins the Navy Cross on his chest in a ceremony attended by the same officers who once called his work impossible. Japanese naval intelligence intercepts fragments of American communications about the engagement. Their analysts piece together what happened to Yahagi and produce a report that circulates through Imperial Navy headquarters. They describe some kind of super weapon capable of instantaneous destruction. Morale in the Imperial Japanese Navy collapses like a building with its foundations removed. Surviving ships refuse to leave port. Commanders fabricate mechanical failures to avoid surface engagements. Crews whisper about demon bullets that kill from inside. The war at sea is effectively over. Not because Japan has no ships left, because the ships they have are afraid to sail. Morrison stands on Missouri's deck watching the Pacific sunset turn the ocean to liquid copper. He has won. The Mark 8 works. The Navy believes. The enemy is broken. But the victory tastes like ashes in his mouth. Because 439 ghosts from Samar still sail beside him. Men who died charging battleships they could not hurt. Men whose lives his shells could have saved, if only they had arrived in time. "We were too late," he whispers to the darkening sea. "We were too late for the ones who needed us most." The war will end in 4 months. Japan will surrender. The Pacific will fall silent. Harold Morrison will go home to Pittsburgh, carrying medals he never wanted and memories he can never escape. But this story has one final chapter. One secret the Navy kept buried for 50 years. A set of captured Japanese documents that answer the question Morrison asked himself every single day until his last breath. What if we had faced Yamato? What if the Mark 8 had met the mightiest battleship ever built in a surface engagement gun? To gunshell against armor steel against steel. The answer, when it finally emerged from classified archives in 2003, would change everything we thought we knew about the final days of the Pacific War. In Part 4, we discover the truth about Harold Morrison's last secret. the Japanese countermeasures that almost worked, the Cold War tests that exceeded wartime estimates, and the 7 words on a gravestone in Pittsburgh that captured the soul of a man who changed history and never told anyone. Let me take you back to where this journey began. A metallurgist from Pittsburgh named Harold Morrison had an idea that every expert in America called impossible. A shell that could punch through 16 inches of Japanese armor and detonate inside enemy ships. He fought bureaucracy that tried to bury him. He survived an admiral who threatened to destroy his career. He watched 439 Americans die at Samar because his weapon was not there to save them. Then came redemption. The demonstration at Kahulawe that silenced every critic in the room. The destruction of the cruiser Yahagi in 30 seconds with 2 shells. The collapse of Japanese naval morale, so complete that surviving ships refused to leave port. The Mark 8, super heavy shell, changed the Pacific War. But what happened to the man who created it? This story has one final twist. One that nobody expected. Because success, as Harold Morrison would discover, sometimes carries a price heavier than any failure he ever endured. And a secret buried in Japanese archives for 50 years would answer the question that haunted him until his final breath. The war ended on August 15, 1945. Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender. Sailors danced on the decks of American warships across the Pacific. Music and laughter echoed through steel corridors that had known nothing but fear and thunder for 4 years. Lieutenant Commander Harold Morrison was aboard USS Missouri when the news arrived. He did not celebrate. He stood alone on the fantail, watching the sunset paint the ocean in shades of gold and crimson and blood. And other officers toasted victory below decks. Their joy drifted up through the hatches like smoke from a distant fire. Morrison could not join them. He was thinking about Samar, about the 439 men who charged Japanese battleships with guns that could not scratch the paint, about the Mark 8 shells that sat unused in magazines 300 miles away while destroyers sailed into certain death. "We were too late," he wrote in his journal that night. "The shells worked, but we were too late for the men who needed them most. That is the only truth that matters." Morrison returned to Pittsburgh in October 1945. The Navy offered him a permanent commission, a career path that could lead to Rear Admiral within 15 years. He declined without hesitation. "I am a metallurgist," he told his commanding officer, "not a warrior. The war is over. Time to go home." He went back to the steel factory where he had worked before Pearl Harbor. The same furnaces, the same machines, the same men he had known since he was 18 years old. Within a year, he was managing the research department. Within 5, he was vice president of operations. His neighbors knew him as a quiet man who kept a small garden, read books about geology, and never talked about the war. The Navy tried to award him the Congressional Medal of Honor. The nomination was rejected because his contributions were classified as technical rather than combat-related. A bureaucratic distinction that meant everything to Washington, and nothing to the sailors whose lives his shells saved. Instead, he received the Navy Distinguished Service Medal in a private ceremony attended by 12 people. No newspapers covered the event. No photographers captured the moment. Harold Morrison, the man who made the mightiest battleships in history, helpless, faded into anonymity like smoke dissolving into a gray sky. Dr. Edward Chambers, the scientist who championed the Mark 8 from its first day, died of a heart attack in 1952. He was 63. His obituary in the Washington Post mentioned contributions to naval ordnance without specifics. The details were still classified. Admiral Chandler, the man who tried to kill the program, retired in 1948 with full honors. He wrote a memoir about his naval career. It never mentioned the Mark 8 or the young metallurgist who proved him wrong. Not one word. Commander Sarah Chen left the Navy in 1946 and became a professor of Asian languages at Stanford. In 1967, she published a book about Japanese naval communications during World War II. One chapter described American ammunition developments that terrorized Imperial Navy commanders. She never named Morrison directly, but those who understood the story recognized every detail. Morrison himself rarely spoke about the war. His children grew up knowing their father had served in the Navy. They did not know he had changed the course of naval warfare. He kept his medals in a shoebox in the bedroom closet, buried beneath old socks and forgotten letters. He never attended reunions. He never gave interviews. He carried his secrets the way he carried everything else, quietly, without complaint, without asking anyone to notice. But the legacy of Harold Morrison extended far beyond his quiet retirement in Pennsylvania. It reached across decades and continents, and wars that he never fought in. The Mark 8 shell remained in active service for 46 years. When the Iowa-class battleships were recommissioned during the Korean War, Mark 8 ammunition was loaded into their magazines once again. The same shells Morrison helped design were fired at North Korean coastal positions in 1951 and 1952. Shore batteries that had withstood conventional bombardment for weeks were destroyed in hours. During the Vietnam War, a USS New Jersey deployed to the coast of Southeast Asia, carrying Mark 8 rounds for shore bombardment missions. The delayed fuse technology that Morrison invented to kill battleships proved devastating against fortified bunkers buried deep underground. Vietnamese commanders reported that American shells seemed to explode from inside the earth itself with no warning. Tunnels collapsed. Bunkers that survived direct hits from conventional rounds were vaporized from within. The weapon designed to penetrate naval armor found a second life, penetrating reinforced concrete and packed earth. In 1991, during Operation Desert Storm, USS Missouri and USS Wisconsin fired their final combat rounds in history. Some of those shells were Mark 8 variants, improved versions of the original design, but built on the same principles Morrison discovered in a Virginia warehouse in 1942. They struck Iraqi positions along the Kuwaiti coast with the same penetrating power that had terrified Japanese admirals half a century earlier. The principles Morrison pioneered spread far beyond naval ammunition into almost every branch of modern warfare. Tank shells used by armies around the world employ delayed fuse mechanisms directly descended from his 1943 chemical capsule design. The M829 armor-piercing round fired by American Abrams tanks uses penetration physics that Morrison helped discover. Bunker buster bombs dropped on hardened underground targets use timing circuits based on his chemical delay system. Even medical research benefited from his work in ways he never imagined. Techniques developed to study how shells penetrate armor led to advances in understanding traumatic ballistic injuries. The same physics that explained how metal moves through steel helped surgeons understand how projectiles move through human tissue. 17 nations eventually adopted ammunition based on Mark 8 principles. The Soviet Union reverse-engineered, captured shells and developed their own versions within 3 years of the war's end. British, French, and German ordnance programs all incorporated delayed detonation technology into their post-war arsenals. Conservative military estimates suggest that weapons descended from Morrison's original design have been deployed in over 340 military operations across 4 continents since 1945. The total number of lives saved is impossible to calculate with precision. But naval historians who have studied the Mark 8's complete service record agree on one conclusion. It represented the single most important shift in how militaries thought about the relationship between armor and penetration in the 20th century. The age of bigger armor wins ended the moment Morrison's shell punched through that test plate in Virginia. It never came back. Think about what Morrison faced. He was a civilian, a factory worker with a college degree and calloused hands. He had no military experience, no political connections, no authority to demand anything from anyone. His idea was dismissed as impossible by experts who had spent decades studying naval warfare. Admiral Chandler called it a fantasy and threatened to destroy his career. The Bureau of Ordnance rejected it as theoretically interesting but practically impossible. Every institutional force and the most powerful military on Earth told him to stop. And yet he persisted. He found allies where others saw only obstacles. He turned rejection into fuel. He understood something that most people never learn in their entire lives. Being right is not enough. You have to prove you are right. And sometimes proving it means breaking rules, risking everything you have, and accepting that success might come too late to save everyone you wanted to save. History is full of men and women who faced the same wall Morrison faced. In 1940, a British engineer named Barnes Wallis proposed a bouncing bomb that could skip across water and destroy German hydroelectric dams. Military leaders called it insane. Wallis built it anyway. Operation Chastise became one of the most celebrated raids in the history of aerial warfare. In 1942, a Navy pilot named John Thatch developed a new fighter formation to counter superior Japanese Zero aircraft that were slaughtering American pilots across the Pacific. His commanding officers were skeptical. Thatch proved the formation worked at the Battle of Midway. The Thatch Weave saved hundreds of American pilots and became standard doctrine for a generation. In 1944, an Army doctor named Charles Drew pioneered blood plasma preservation techniques that military medical authorities initially rejected as too complicated for battlefield conditions. His methods were eventually adopted across every theater of war and saved tens of thousands of wounded soldiers who would have bled to death without them. The pattern repeats throughout history, like a drumbeat. Innovation comes from unexpected places. The people closest to problems often see solutions that experts miss because experts are too invested in the way things have always been done. And the greatest obstacle to progress is almost never technical difficulty. It is institutional resistance, the fear of change dressed in the uniform of experience. Morrison understood this instinctively. The Navy did not need a better shell, he told an interviewer decades later in one of his only public statements about the war. They needed permission to believe a better shell was possible. My job was not inventing. My job was giving them that permission. But there is one detail that most histories leave out. One secret that remained classified until 2003. And it changes everything about how we understand the Mark VIII's true place in history. In 1946, American occupation forces in Japan gained access to Imperial Navy archives stored in underground vaults beneath Tokyo. Among thousands of captured documents was a folder stamped with the highest security classification the Japanese military possessed. The label read, Threat Assessment American Super Ammunition. Inside were detailed Japanese analyses of the Mark VIII shell, engineering diagrams, metallurgical theories, penetration calculations. What the documents revealed was stunning. Japanese engineers had actually figured out how the shell worked. By early 1945, through painstaking analysis of wreckage and damage patterns, they understood the delayed chemical fuse mechanism and the specialized steel alloy composition. They knew exactly why their armor was useless against it. But here is the part that changes everything. The documents also contain something else. A Japanese plan to counter the Mark VIII. A detailed engineering proposal to add internal armor layers to Yamato and the remaining capital ships. A complete redesign that, according to Japanese calculations, would have restored meaningful protection against the American shells. The plan was approved by Admiral Toyota on March 28, 1945. Implementation was scheduled to begin on April 15th. Yamato sailed on her suicide mission to Okinawa on April 6th, 9 days before the modifications could begin. If Operation Tengo had been delayed by just 2 weeks, Yamato would have received armor upgrades that Japanese engineers calculated would reduce Mark VIII penetration depth by approximately 40%. Enough to potentially save vital machinery spaces from internal detonation. Enough to give the most powerful warship ever built a fighting chance in a surface engagement against American battleships. The timing of Yamato's final voyage was not determined by American strategy. It was determined by Japanese desperation to support ground troops dying on Okinawa. A decision made by men who did not know that salvation for their greatest ship was only 9 days away. Morrison never learned about these documents. They were not declassified until 2003, 8 years after his death. But the revelation answers the question that consumed him for half a century. What if the Mark VIII had faced Yamato in a surface battle? The answer buried in Japanese archives is this. If they had met even 1 month later, the outcome might have been very different. The Mark 8 arrived at precisely the right moment in history. A few weeks earlier, and production would not have been sufficient. A few weeks later, and Japanese countermeasures might have blunted its killing power. Morrison's weapon did not just work. It worked at the exact moment it needed to work. And that is either the greatest stroke of luck in military history, or something that looks very much like fate. Harold Morrison died on September 12, 1995. He was 77 years old. His obituary in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette described him as a retired steel executive and World War II veteran. It mentioned his Navy Distinguished Service Medal. It said nothing about shells or battleships or armor, or the secrets he carried for 50 years. At his funeral, a former Navy captain who was one of the last surviving officers to know the full story spoke briefly over the casket. Harold never wanted recognition, the captain said. He wanted results. He got them. And because of what he did, sailors came home to their families who otherwise would not have. That is the only monument he ever needed. Morrison was buried in a small cemetery outside Pittsburgh. His gravestone lists his name, his dates, and a simple inscription he chose himself years before he died. 7 words. He tried to make things better. No mention of shells, no mention of battleships, no mention of Yamato or Yahagi or the demon bullets from hell. Just 7 words that captured everything about the man who changed naval warfare and never told a soul. So, let me ask you something. Somewhere in the world right now, there is another Harold Morrison. Someone with an idea that experts call impossible. Someone fighting against a system that refuses to listen. Someone who sees a solution that nobody else believes in. Maybe it is a scientist working on clean energy in a basement laboratory. Maybe it is an engineer designing safer vehicles on a kitchen table. Maybe it is a doctor developing treatments that her colleagues dismiss as fantasy. Maybe it is someone you know. Maybe it is you. From a factory worker in Pittsburgh with calloused hands and an idea everyone called insane, to a weapon that made the mightiest battleships in history helpless in 30 seconds. Harold Morrison proved that innovation does not require genius. It does not require wealth, or power, or connections, or permission. It requires courage. The courage to be wrong. The courage to be laughed at. The courage to keep working when every voice around you says stop. And because of that courage, the Mark 8 shell served for 46 years across 3 wars on 4 continents. It influenced weapons development in 17 nations. It saved lives that can never be counted. If this story moved, you share it. Not for views, not for algorithms, but because somewhere out there someone needs to hear that their impossible idea might just change the world. History is not made by people who accept what is possible. It is made by people who redefine it. Harold Morrison understood that. And now so do you.